Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Really happy today to be joined by Matt Wilkerson, who's the founder of Extern. We're going to be talking about the work that he's doing, how post-secondary pathways are a challenging space right now, but there's maybe some opportunities connecting that to the world of work. Matt will walk us through all of that. Before we do any of that, Matt, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
It's great to have you. And we always start by getting your origin story, which I realize is intertwined with the work you're doing now at Extern. But can you catch us up on how you got to this point in your professional life?
Yeah, the mission behind Extern is that we are imagining a world where anyone can get the work experience that they want anytime from anywhere.
Mhm.
And what we do at Extern is we basically created this new type of work experience called the remote externship that's basically easier than an internship for students
Mm.
and companies.
Okay.
And it really goes back to when I even was in high school. I was personally kind of a big movie nerd, big movie geek.
Yeah.
I, would program websites and online communities, fan communities for movies I was excited about, and
Nice.
build these kind of 3D movies with tools like 3D Studio Max
Nice.
and video games. And so when I went to college, I was very fortunate to get it off the wait list at MIT. I studied computer science and engineering, and I thought I want to go work for an industrial light and magic, Pixar,
Sure.
doing special effects for film.
Yeah.
And as I got
CGI.
in,
Yeah.
exactly, because this was, the 90s, when I was in high school is kind of the CGI revolution, right? You
Right.
had like films like Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park and kind of this explosion. And as I got into it, what I realized was, first of all, MIT was an incredible place. You're around amazing people.
Mhm.
You're learning kind of everything you possibly can about both the theory and practice of engineering and computer science. And I was kind of getting the left side of my brain treated there. But for special effects, I wanted to really also treat the right side of my brain, the
Yeah.
artistic side.
Right.
And so that wasn't coming through as much. And so in my mind, I thought, well, do I really, do I necessarily want to only do software engineering for the next couple of decades and only focus on doing that for, say, a Pixar? Because it's a very specialized,
Hmm.
commitment if you're going to go into that industry. It's
Yeah.
not something that necessarily translates very broadly. So
Hmm.
I spent my college years actually exploring a bunch of different things. It turns out at one point I thought I wanted to go into computer security. And then eventually it just all kind of muddled together in my mind. I got super confused. I ended up actually getting an internship. I had a few internships. I had one at a mutual fund as a programmer. I worked for a summer at the computer graphics lab there. Worked at Ernst& Young,
Hmm.
doing a computer security externship.
Yep.
But I had this one internship at a Fortune 500 company that got canceled a week before I was going to start.
Mm.
And the reason was they told me they didn't have the time or the resources or the staff to support me.
Right.
And so that was kind of a bummer because I thought, well, I got this internship. What do you mean you have the staff to support me?
Right.
Well, eventually, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was ambitious, I just started to interview for investment banking because this
Sure.
was 2005,
Yeah.
2004 or 5, and the finance boom was popular among students.
And
And
there's a
I went
pathway there
there.
too, right? At MIT, like that is kind of almost it's an expected trajectory for folks, a good chunk of folks who want to get into the financial industry in New York. MIT is a nice feeder
Yeah.
into the top
Oh,
tier there.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And a lot of us, and, I might even have grouped myself there, we came in, the dot-com boom had happened when we started college, and the
Right.
bust happened while we were in school.
Right.
So a lot of people it was hard to get jobs in, even
Hmm.
in the tech space around, call it 2002, 2003. So
Yeah.
some of us sort of started looking other places, and investment banking was sort of this like, golden career path, right?
Yeah.
To go into, and if you could get a job. Well, I interviewed at probably 10 banks. They all rejected me after the first interview
Mm.
because they said, you don't have any internship experience
Mm.
in finance. You haven't been
Mm.
spending time committing yourself to this
Mm.
field and showing
Yeah.
us through internships. And I thought, well, yeah, well, I didn't know what I'm just trying to figure this stuff out as I go along. You know, you only have 4 years,
Right.
or really it's 3 years, right? By the time you kind of start interviewing.
Yeah.
And turns out the last interview I had of that season was with Morgan Stanley. And at that point, I thought, I don't really care at this point. I didn't actually want to do investment banking. It
Sure.
actually sounded like a horrible career path, just the amount of abuse that you take.
Yeah.
But I thought, you know what, let me just try it out. I went through the interview process, and I don't know, maybe it's because I wasn't trying so hard that all of a sudden I found
Yeah.
myself with an offer.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I had all these friends around me who said, you know what? I really wanted that, and you didn't really want that. So how did you get that offer? And I almost felt this obligation to take it,
Yeah.
right? And also to prove, could I
Right.
do this?
It's also, I
Because
mean,
it
it's a pretty prestigious gig and it's well compensated, right? So
yes,
like there
exactly.
was like an upside for you. Maybe you loved it, and
There
it's like,
was, but I was, to be honest, I was a little
skeptical.
nervous, and
Mm.
New York was kind of intimidating, and
Yeah.
so moved there, and I thought, what's the worst that could happen? Well, turns out I got physically injured. So 9 months in, I got tendonitis from typing so much
Wow.
and I went to doctors, I went to um, therapists. No one could really help. Couldn't do anything. It's not like carpal tunnel. Carpal tunnels, if
Yeah.
people have heard of, that's where your nerve is pinched,
Mm.
and you can actually have surgery to in your wrist to fix that. Tendonitis is just
Yeah.
rest for a
Right.
long, long, long time.
Right. And it's not like that industry is particularly comfortable with that approach too. Like it's not
Oh
like,
no.
why don't you just let's get some
Oh, an
affordances in
analyst who
there.
can't
Let's get
type.
some assistive technology so that we can work around. It's more like,
I tried to explore the Dragon, there's the Dragon
yeah.
software, like, but you
Hmm.
can't do Excel in that.
Yeah.
It's just, and so yeah, an analyst who can't type
Yeah.
isn't terribly valuable. So I actually suddenly had, this crisis of confidence around my career path. That
Yeah.
it's over.
Yeah.
I can't do anything. And luckily, I had a
You're
vice
like
president.
23, by the way, at the time, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
you're,
at the time, yeah. And luckily, I had this vice president who he's a managing director there now, still in the media communications group. They said, Matt, look, can you come in and sit behind the interns and just coach them and help them? Because
mm,
the summer interns are in at that point.
yeah.
They're clueless. They don't know what's going on. They need a lot of help,
Yeah.
and nobody has time to help them.
By the way,
Nobody has time.
this sounds like a pretty good movie screenplay, Matt. I don't know if you're working on that, but this almost feels like maybe like Meatballs meets Wall Street. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, which by the way, Gordon Gekko was worshipped in that world.
Yeah.
Ironically, there's some people that had someone had like a framed photo of Gordon Gekko from the
Yeah.
movie Wall Street on their desk. So I basically I came in, I sat, I had purpose now, so I was working with the interns. I really enjoyed it. And by the end of that summer, they all were so good at what they were doing. They're almost basically like the first year analysts
Yeah.
in terms of their skill set at that point, but they
Hmm.
all got full-time job offers
Nice.
to come back and work full time.
Hmm.
And so that experience coupled with that internship that got canceled a week before,
Yeah.
gave me this perspective on both sides
Yeah.
of, you know, if you think about just giving more work experiences to young people, because obviously, internships are critical
Yeah.
to truly learning a skill set, to
Mm.
truly understanding also what do you want to do in life.
Yeah. Because even to
Uh,
your point, like some people frequently find out what they don't want to be by virtue
yeah,
of an internship where you're like, I
and
tried it out. It's not for me. That's hugely valuable rather than picking that up 3 or 4 years
yes,
later, and you're missing out on it's a missed opportunity if you just figure out what you're not into as much as it is figuring out what you are into.
exactly, and that's what I had figured out. And so just moving on, after Morgan Stanley, I worked for a few years at a venture capital fund, technology crossover ventures, and just really wanted to get on the other side of the table as an entrepreneur. A friend of
Mm,
mine from college had an idea around a e-commerce marketplace for hard to find luxury goods. She
mm,
recruited me as a co-founder. Company was called Aha Life. We kind of went through the whole gamut of startup stories that you might watch on HBO's Silicon Valley.
yeah.
Raised 20 plus million in funding rapidly. I think we went through our Series B in kind of 2 years. Incredible experience.
Yeah. You had me at luxury goods, by the way. That
Yeah,
sounds
I
like
mean,
an
it
interesting gig. Yeah.
we were basically like figuring out, this was around when Amazon hadn't quite taken over the world quite
Yep.
yet.
Hmm.
And then you also had, this was after the financial crisis. You had the whole flash sale e-commerce model sprung up. And
Yep.
you had a bunch of these brands that were artisans, kind of
Hmm.
emerging luxury brands that wanted to protect what they were doing and not
Yeah.
have to sell on Amazon, not have to sell on the flash sale site. So we were
Yeah.
this curated destination to hold those brands up. And it was really content merged with commerce.
Yep.
And eventually the company merged with another company on the Australian Stock Exchange. And I said, look, the luxury industry, fashion industry, a lot of fun, had a very interesting time in it, but I wanted to do something next that really made an impact in people's lives, a very deep impact. And so I went back, thought back to these ideas that I mentioned earlier. And a friend of mine who had a kind of like a Kaplan, Princeton Review test prep company, an overseas test prep company
Okay.
in Shanghai. This was like
Oh,
back
wow.
when, the China boom was like really
Cool.
in
Nice.
full swing when,
Yeah.
we were all kind of like, the
Let's see what
US and China
happens.
was like, let's hold hands and like look to the future together
Yeah.
before all the recent political mess. But we basically had this idea of, he had said to me, listen, I have, students who are studying, looking for they're in college, but they're struggling to get internships. If you can figure out how to solve this problem,
Yeah.
like that's a massive problem. And I thought, yeah, that is. I mean, I remember that. It's so hairy to try to
Hmm.
figure out how to get internships. And especially if you don't go to the right school or you
Right.
don't have certain family connections,
Sure.
you didn't already have a bunch of internships in high school.
You
You're
don't have a Matt Wilkerson as like the Mr. Miyagi of the intern crew,
exactly right.
you
You
know?
don't luck up and happen to have someone who's able to spend that time.
Yeah.
So I started a company at that time called Paragon One. We were essentially kind of like an online career coaching service. I called us, the career center you wish you had. Career
Okay.
center as a service. And we
Yep.
would match students up with industry professionals in all these different career fields and build kind of a curriculum around, how do you build your resume? How do you do interviews?
Yep.
Just how do you explore fields? What is it like to work in them?
Hmm.
And we ended up going through Y Combinator, raised $3 million in pre-seed, seed money. And at one point we had about 8 universities working with us. Now it was specifically their international student divisions, because
Oh,
that's where they had the budgets, because international students would pay full tuition
I see.
to go to universities. And so they
Hmm.
had these bigger budgets to spend to help them, how do I connect with potential internships when I'm on campus? But we weren't really able to expand beyond that group to kind of the mainstream, going to career centers. And what I realized was the coaching product we had built was a vitamin, but it
Hmm.
wasn't a painkiller.
Hmm.
And we were hearing from our students, hey, like, great, I did my coaching, but I'm still struggling to get interviews. Or
Yeah.
I'm getting interviews, but I'm not doing well at them because I don't have anything on my resume to talk about,
Right.
or my confidence isn't there. And so, we kind
Hmm.
of looked into this problem and realized at the end of the day, the real determinant was, did you already have internships on your resume? If you did,
Right.
you
Right.
did really great in your next internship interview or your full-time interview.
Right.
So we thought, this is the pain, like this is the real product. Let's try to figure out how to deliver an internship. And of course, you already have had job boards, you've got the handshakes of the world and
Sure.
Indeeds, but they're just matching and aggregating existing supply and demand of work
Right.
experience,
Hmm.
right? And because what we were doing on the back end of the coaching product is our team was spending all this time making introductions to companies,
Yeah.
trying to help set up interviews, like doing everything you can, just like coding
Right.
boot camps, try to set
Right.
up
Because career services in higher ed is like
basically.
a relatively recent development, and it's kind of spotty depending on where you are and how connected are they to the actual full life cycle, I guess. It does seem like if you're coming at this from the outside as like a third party, you could probably get a little closer to the career pathway to kind of make sure that they're successful on that end. Whereas by nature of career services, it's kind of inside higher ed. So it's probably a little trickier to kind of manage that bridging out.
It is in career services and career offices at universities and colleges. they're just understaffed.
Yep.
They don't have the budgets. They're sort of this like, you know, cost center that kind of sits out, and
Right.
it's all about where it's positioned,
Mhm.
the priorities of the institution.
How
It's not
much is the
really,
institution measuring job placement as the outcome as opposed to a degree? At least there's been some awakening within higher ed around at least getting to that completion. The some college, no degree problem is a huge problem in higher education. But then beyond that, beyond completion, what is a successful outcome on the other end?
yeah. And you're seeing. I just actually read that there's a college, Curry College in Massachusetts, that literally guarantees now for its students that you'll find a job within a year.
Right,
And there's some, I think, there's some things you have to kind of commit to
right,
doing
right.
to be a part of that, or they will pay back part of your student loan.
Right. Even you mentioned, I think, in our prep coming in, how Northeastern is becoming one of the most selective universities, and it's in part
Yeah.
because of this type of model. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. I'm going to kind of complete kind of the
Yeah,
learning piece, but I want to circle back
sure.
to the Northeastern point because it is
Yeah.
very important. So we were doing this coaching, and then we were spending all this time trying to make those introductions. And the companies that we would go to said, the general feedback was, look, yeah, we'd love to have interns, but a lot of these interns they didn't go to a certain school, or they didn't have internships
Right.
already. And there
Yeah.
was this concern, like, do I want to spend the time to train
Right.
them, or
There's an
is it there?
opportunity cost there, right? Like,
Right.
is
It
it
was just
worth the
too
effort?
laborious,
Hmm.
right? They didn't have the time.
Yep.
And so that was where the light bulb went off. And it went back to, again, those two experiences I had, the
Yeah.
internship that got canceled, and then being at Morgan Stanley, which was, it's about the time,
Hmm.
the employee time,
Yeah.
right? Like, how do you make employee time more efficient,
Yeah.
where instead of taking on one intern, you could take on 100, what we call
Yeah.
externs now.
Yeah.
So, the question is, all right, well, does this responsibility that we're talking about here, does that sit with companies or with institutions?
Hmm.
Because it's sort
In
of in
between.
between, right?
Yeah.
Now, on the institution side, right, let's look at great examples of where it's working. Northeastern, Drexel, Waterloo,
Yeah.
there's various universities that are doing co-op programs where it's embedded into the curriculum. Maybe you do
Hmm.
a year or a semester and you alternate to do work with companies. And Northeastern just last year had I think it was a less than 6% acceptance rate.
Yeah.
That's an Ivy League acceptance rate. I think
Right.
that was less than
That's surprising.
UPenn,
Hmm.
Dartmouth, and Cornell.
Yeah.
So that speaks to families and students now saying work experience is critical.
Yeah.
I want to go to an institution that's going to make sure I get that
Yeah.
and not leave it to chance. Now, the reality is launching a co-op program is a serious
Yeah.
endeavor. And I mean, it's
Right.
really, they've built the co-op schools have built it into the fabric of
Yeah. It's like part of the
programs.
cultural identity of those
Exactly.
universities. Yeah.
You can't just go to some university and even if the provost or the deans said, yeah, let's do this,
Yeah.
it's another story to like, you got to literally like re-architect your entire degree programs.
Yep.
So I don't think that's a practical thing that's going to happen anytime soon. And then of course there's apprenticeships, and I know Ryan Craig we've had before, who's an investor in us. He's obviously talking a lot about apprenticeships and
Yep.
government support for that, and that there's obviously a lot of challenges in getting that. But those are 12 to 18-month programs that are meant
Yep.
to deliver a full-time job at the end.
Hmm.
But you need companies to have some kind of incentive, which
Yes.
they do in Europe and the UK in particular, where they get subsidies for this. But in the US, it's just not a thing. And so
Yeah.
companies to have that initiative
Hmm.
to go and do that,
Yeah. What's in it for
it's
them?
hard.
It's a leap of faith to go to that extent.
Yeah. So when we had all these insights, we said, all right, we basically shut down the old product and business, and we basically did a reboot and said, let's deliver something like an internship. Now,
Yeah.
initially we called this a remote internship.
Right. This is pre-COVID, but also hybrid. Is that right?
Yeah. So we made these decisions. We were still pre-COVID barely. We were running some experiments. We had some startups, and we basically built kind of like the early MVP was just like, how do you kind of help take all these little pieces off of the plate of a company for certain kinds of projects? Because it
Yep.
depends on what the project is. So some of our earliest projects were market research and doing venture capital deal sourcing.
Hmm.
A lot of students were curious about venture capitals.
That's cool.
And
Yeah.
it turns out VC firms, a lot of them are small and they don't have a lot of resources, but they
Yeah.
need to kind of have an insight on like what startups are out there,
Right.
really getting that flow of information and analysis. So we built a couple of programs around this, but we were calling this the remote internship. The idea being, hey, you
Yeah.
can't launch your own internship program probably, so we'll be that
Right.
internship extension for you.
Hmm.
So you
Which
can
opens up, you were talking about scale before. The nice thing about remote is that it does allow you to match talent supply to wherever the demand might
It's
be.
exactly. It's perfect. Now two issues were when we would go to, in particular, larger companies.
Hmm.
They had two big objections at the time. One was, well, you can't call this an internship because we have an internship program.
Mm.
Okay. So we eventually figured out, okay, we landed on externship.
Yeah.
Sounds like internship, but nobody
Yeah.
really quite knows what it means.
Yeah.
It historically has meant shadowing, but we've reinvented what externship means
Hmm.
to essentially mean like a short term, a real work experience,
Yeah.
but with integrated structured learning. So you have a structured learning program built into the real work experience,
Right.
and it could be anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks.
Is it paid?
But so it is paid if the company pays extern,
Mhm.
which traditionally these large corporates that have budgets for that, then the student gets a cut of that as a
I
stipend.
see. Mhm.
But a lot of the companies that we work with right now don't pay. So we have a free version
I
of the
see.
externship that you can launch. It's very cookie cutter. It's very kind of
I see.
constrained and limited in what it can do.
Right.
But it's at least we only take companies on board if it meets certain criteria. So it
Mhm.
has to be genuinely very interesting for the student, right? It can't just be
Yeah.
something that's like a student job. You should just be paying them hourly.
I mean, the VC deal sourcing sounds super
Right.
interesting,
It's like that. It's like, management consulting, VC, product management. Towards the end of the year, we want to launch cybersecurity,
Yeah.
certain kinds of marketing projects that are more advanced.
Relevant
Things that
domains. Yeah.
yeah, but where a student isn't going to be normally qualified to just go and do that.
I see. Yep.
So it's meant to benefit the student more.
Yep.
But the other thing that we were hearing back from companies at the time was, why would we do remote?
Mhm.
In person's better, which,
Yeah.
okay, depend. The answer is
2019, when is this?
this is into 2019,
Yeah.
beginning of 2020.
Uh-huh.
And so then COVID hits
Yes.
and everything changes.
Yeah.
Everything changes. In the short term, we had schools paying us to help their students get internships because their internships had been canceled. That summer,
Right.
if you remember.
And you already
And
had
then,
you had some domain expertise around the online. We're now at a point where we
yeah,
can talk about the crazy that happened. Like there was a massive cultural shift that happens. I was also fortunate in that I was kind of on the remote authoring mindset, the remote live online kind of experience was something that was
yeah,
very much baked into my DNA. But like that gave us a bit of a first mover advantage, and like a lot of folks had to kind of catch up to us. I could imagine that allow for kind of a next level acceleration of the work that you were doing.
yeah. It was that whole story of right place, right time.
Yeah.
We had been building for remote, and then all of a sudden we had colleges, we had even some high schools, and then we started to get the attention of large corporates finally.
Yeah.
So that started with Meta, at the time was still called Facebook, right
Yeah.
before they changed their name. Once we got Meta on board, then we got PwC,
Yeah.
National Geographic, the Nature Conservancy,
Yeah.
Pfizer, and then today we work with some major brands, including Beats by Dre, HSBC, Expedia, Home
Yeah.
Depot,
Wow.
AT&T.
That's quite a masthead you got there, Matt. Good work by you in terms of those groups. And then I also imagine as providing those services, you start to get a little more of a bird's eye view of industries and work cultures and what's working, what's not working, which I guess can also help you guide the folks who are signing on to your program. In some ways, you're kind of like
Mhm.
federating that these programs are relevant and it's a disruptive time. I did mention I would bring up AI. Folks are very
Yeah.
concerned around the future of work, the nature of jobs. It does seem like connecting into these, significant brands, there's a real advantage to getting a window into what work is like for them, for the folks that you're providing these services to.
Yeah. We've been spending a lot of time just getting really deep into the idea of how do you create a work experience that scales well.
Yeah.
And it really boils down to structured learning, integrated projects on top of what you might historically call an internship.
Yep.
And so, how do you basically deliver something that's reliable, that's repeatable,
Yeah.
and that can deliver good work output for the company?
Right.
So, and I want to touch on AI, but to kind of lead into that, the idea here is when you're working with any person, but especially students, and you've got all of these different tasks, you've got to kind of break down, right? We figured out everything from even recruiting
Yeah.
to onboarding to
Mm.
training to giving feedback
Yeah.
to answering questions to then
Yep.
assessing.
Hmm.
Those are all kind of functions in the work process.
Yep.
So you take those, you break those down, and it's almost like thinking of it as a kind of an assembly line for knowledge work,
Yeah.
right? And so one of the key parts of that is how do you learn and how do you then do tasks? And so you might say, all right, so venture capital deal sourcing, right? Or doing, say, like a penetration test in cybersecurity.
Yep.
All right, so that's a project, or that you could say that's a work project. But if you really look at it, you break it down, there's all these different components.
Yep.
And we think of them as sort of like modules, right? That add
Yep.
up. So if you want to be really good at VC deal sourcing, you've got to know how to analyze a market. You need to know how to, how do you do proper company research? Where do you look for information? How do you verify it's accurate?
Yep.
And then if you want to take it a step further and do kind of customer discovery and user interviews, how do you follow a proper interview
Yeah.
script? How
What
do
kind
you
of rigor
ask
can you build
follow-up?
in?
Yeah.
Hmm.
How do you ask follow-up questions?
Yep.
All of these are pieces that themselves you can break apart into learning modules.
Yep.
So it's weaving that into the real work experience. Now, when it comes to AI, we think about it, really in a couple different ways. So first of all, there's just the skill set that students need to be. And so we're really thinking deeply about like, not just what do you need to know today,
Right.
but we're always looking for ways that LLMs can help our externs sort of leapfrog existing people.
Yeah.
So we want to be teaching what are the new methods.
Hmm.
Obviously, like prompting, prompt engineering.
Sure.
These are skills that just are
But it's
increasing to
also
be just
almost like, if
expected.
I'm hearing you right, it's also almost like horizon thinking, where like the prompts are what's the coin of the realm today, but we realize these things will be disrupted. So like that kind of systems thinking, it's almost like a mindset, even beyond a skill set. I think there are ways of thinking, ways of working that are really part of the secret sauce, I think, of the experience gap that folks are talking about now, where
Yeah.
there's just mindsets and mental models, I think, that are more common in our work lives that frequently aren't exposed to folks in their post-secondary education.
It's true. I mean, and to give you one example, you spend a lot of your time in your post-secondary education learning how to produce large volumes of output,
Yeah.
right? Especially if you're talking about, research papers,
Yeah.
or, you take a class like, hey, you need to write
Yeah.
turn in a 20-page paper. You're like,
Right.
well, I gotta fill up 20 pages. And so,
A thesis, maybe, or, like even if you have to start publishing academic papers, there's a whole grist
yes,
mill over there around cracking out publications.
yes, yes. And I learned recently, the worst thing you can do when you meet a PhD student is ask them how their thesis is going. It's like, they're year 3 into year 7,
Yeah.
and they have to hear that for 7 years.
Yeah.
And the challenge is you're sort of trained to fill up space,
Yep.
right? To fill up space, and that's how you get the grade.
Hmm.
That's how you proceed. Then you're thrown into the real world. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, people,
Yeah.
they don't have the attention
Yeah.
span to
Yeah.
sit through 5 slides,
It's the elevator
right?
pitch. It's
And
30
forget
seconds. Yeah.
trying to put, complete sentences. I
Yeah.
mean,
Executive summaries and takeaways, all that kind of stuff.
yeah, and it's not to say that writing's still important, right?
Sure.
There's obviously like the Jeff Bezos, Amazon memo
Yeah.
framework,
Mhm.
very important to still be able to put down your thoughts and write them
Mm.
in a concise and simple way. But one of the things that we do in our externships is some of the top students get a chance to present their findings, but they've got
Mm.
to do it in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's It's like, what?
Yeah. Right.
Nope, you're going to get caught off at 3 minutes
Right.
because we're going to go through a bunch of these.
Hmm.
Leadership from the company will sit in. Sometimes we have CXOs who
Yep.
will participate in some of these, and they'll give quick feedback during and afterwards.
Yeah.
And just being able to go through that kind of exercise to synthesize all this information that you're
Yeah.
like, oh, but I got to tell them about this and that and everything else.
It's all a Shark
And
Tank world, Matt. Come on.
exactly. So I think a lot of what we do isn't so much about teaching hard skills.
Yep.
It's about how can you think analytically, process, take vague information oftentimes,
Yeah.
and then communicate that in written form and live. We're always looking at creating externships based on fundamentals for things you'll always need to know.
Yep. The so-called durable skills, right? Yep.
Yes. And where areas where AI is not replacing,
Yep.
right? Like those are now going to become even more important.
Hmm.
But the idea too for us is we see LLMs as being a critical next step in our journey. So,
Yeah.
just to kind of tell you where we're going. So today we've had about 250,000 applications to externships. We've worked with probably about 40 companies since 2020
Yeah.
and have had about 250,000 applications. We've only accepted about 10%.
Oh, wow.
So about
Okay.
25, but still
A lot of
25,000
people. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
externs working on multi-week
Right.
externships that
Right.
would not, these were work experiences that would not have existed before without us. And about close to 40% of those have actually come, of those 25,000 have actually come year to date this year.
Okay.
So,
So you're
um,
scaling. Yeah.
yeah. So in Q1, we served about a little over 7,100 externs. That was 160% more than
Oh,
Q4 of last year.
got it. Okay.
And yeah, I mean, this year, even this quarter, we're on track to double from Q1.
The
So
NHL playoffs are happening, Matt. Are there hockey sticks involved here? This sounds like
there,
hockey
there,
sticks.
there are, but here's the thing: this is still roughly only 10% of the
Right.
applicants,
Right.
and our mission is professional experience for anyone,
Mm.
anywhere.
Hmm.
So where we want to go is 10% to 100%
I see.
acceptance.
Yeah.
It's a different way of thinking about it. It's not so much we're accepting everyone.
Right.
It's we are giving everyone a chance to prove themselves. So
Right.
everyone can then enroll in Extern, the platform,
I
the
see.
program, but they're going to get to engage with a career advisor. There'll be
Hmm.
some AI obviously involved
That
with
makes
this
sense.
to
Yep.
figure out what do I want to do? I want to try this. I want to try product. I want to try consulting. I want to,
What color is my parachute and strengths finder and like all that kind of stuff where like you reflect a little bit on who you are and the type of work that will make sense for you.
yes. And then we'll say, go through Extern Academy where you can learn the skill sets you need to learn, kind of this is the preliminary
Yep.
part of your journey. And then you get placed into your first externship. And then you can kind of go all the way up to we've got our super popular externships with HSBC or AT&T
Yeah.
that you want to get into that are oversubscribed. Some of these later externships may have prerequisites now. And some
Got
of
it.
our biggest corporate partners, they might, they want students that
Right.
historically they might have said, give me the students from the top 15 schools. And now
Right.
we're going to say, let's think of it in a new way. How about the students that have done 5, 6, 7 externships
I see.
and have proven their skill sets and have
Hmm.
gotten certified in those externships? It's
Yeah.
basically like verified work experience.
Hmm.
And those are the ones who you can feel more confident about coming in. And they actually probably didn't go to an Ivy League school
Right.
because now they've been given this opportunity to prove themselves. They're going to push themselves and they're more likely to stick around is
Right.
my
Right.
theory with this. I don't have the pure data yet, but they're more likely to stick around than a student that maybe is just, they're still figuring things out.
Right.
So
Right.
what we're doing is we're taking that period that students have often when they even get in their first job and they're still figuring out what they want to do, and we're moving it forward.
I see.
We're time shifting it. So now I can do 6, 7, 8 work experiences,
Yeah.
one a semester on average. Some schools may want to integrate this.
I see.
And then we go to 100% acceptance. Then in just a few years, we're going to have millions of students doing externships. Now, the question is, how do we support those students? Because
Right.
today we do have an amazing team, like absolutely amazing
Yeah.
team of program managers who support students, help to kind of jump in, answer questions,
Right. Right. Because this is
Given
where
that,
the equity question comes in, right? Because if you're
yes,
helping the best students and you're providing the most care to the best students who then are having successful pathways, that works, but it's not ultimately delivering on the mission that you're describing. Like, how do you start to extend that, start to, that is really the promise of AI, is that some of that scalable access to more personalized pathways, more personalized coaching that requires less human intensive engagement to get people on the right track. I imagine that's
yeah.
really what you're kind of envisioning here. And then how does that play forward? How does that relate to maybe the future of higher ed? Higher ed's in some challenging spots now too. Something like this wouldn't necessarily have to be exclusive to higher ed or like post-secondary pathways that are maybe more the traditional degree bearing. Externships, I imagine, can work for, folks who are outside of higher education, also maybe later in their careers. What's the vision look like? Where could this head?
Yeah, well, and touching back on, kind of how this connects with generative AI and LLMs is that we basically we're going to have our own agent to
Mhm.
supplement the support because if we go to 100% acceptance, we can't
Right.
have, just all humans,
Matt, this is what
students.
I'm calling Clippy's revenge. Clippy, we
Oh,
put
you're talking
Clippy
about the
down back in the
Microsoft
day, but
Clippy.
they're getting better now. Clippy's coming
Yeah,
back. Don't
yeah,
call it a
yeah.
comeback, you know?
Yeah, I mean, being able to guide students is two main things. Being able to guide students, right? Answer questions. Because
Yeah.
imagine now you've got that manager sitting next to you that when I was sitting
Yeah.
next to the interns
Hmm.
at Morgan Stanley answering questions
Yeah.
on PowerPoint,
Yeah.
footnotes and
Yeah.
Excel formulas.
Yeah.
Like you have that now sitting next to
Right.
you and being able to also assess
Hmm.
and certify that work is being correct. So if I do
Hmm.
something,
Hmm.
one of the biggest challenges for students is you do it and you're like, did I do the right way?
Right. Right.
It's not so much, is it the right answer? It's more, did I follow the right process here?
Right.
Because often the right answer can still be subjective in a lot of the work that
Sure.
we do,
Yeah.
but did I follow that correct process? And now we're at a place where we can provide that. So,
Yeah.
so now, back to kind of higher ed, I think that, we're hopeful as we go along that higher ed will be able to partner with us and kind of integrate what we're doing,
Yeah.
integrate externships into their curriculum, into their courses.
Right.
We've had some early discussions on this, and I think that, at the right time as we build out the network, we get more and more students in, we kind of showcase, and also on our side, we really, we're taking the product in a direction where it's more modular, right? So
Uh-huh.
now you can, as a school, say, hey, I like these components. I like these externship programs, or maybe, I like this aspect of an externship here and this aspect here. I want to combine that into my class,
Yep.
right? And that becomes, a really powerful modular approach
Right.
to
So higher ed's your partner on the one end, and then I guess the industry's the
companies.
partner on the other side, like around the job
Yep.
placement.
Yep, yep. And so, there we want to continue to have companies that can come on and still do that kind of out of the box free version of
Yep.
launching an externship because our goal is work experience liquidity. Get as many externships, get as many
Yeah.
projects going with companies where
Right.
employees are engaged.
Grow that
And then if you want to,
marketplace, that kind of matchmaking around finding the right
yep,
externship, remote externship for the right student. Where does this ultimately go? This sounds like you're really scaling right now. Are you envisioning this as almost like a LinkedIn alternative or like something really disruptive that emerges for early career? Handshake, I think might be more relevant early career, but is the idea
yep.
that there's a real job to be done here and you're looking at the extern model as really being something that's transformational.
Absolutely. I think this is going to completely reinvent how work is done and how education bridges into work. So I think there's sort of two areas that we, want to disrupt that, we're great kind of first initial innovations, right? There's obviously the job boards of the world.
Yep.
But again, we talked about there's this supply constraint. It doesn't serve the learner or the
Right.
person that wants to get the work experience as easily
Right.
when I'm emailing my resume to 100
Right.
places and not hearing back, right? I
Hmm.
just want to start getting experience. That's
Yes.
like the
Yes.
frustration that the students have, right? You can
Yeah.
feel
Hmm.
it when they work with us and they come to Extern, and you see now we have this incredible ambassador program where students are going, word of mouth, referring us to other students, and they're community online,
Yeah.
and you see the impact that we're having,
Mhm.
this is going to be how hiring is done and how learning is done. So eventually, when we have now every student and eventually also every career switcher, right?
Yeah.
We're starting with students, but students will go and work. We have a great alumni base right now. They can start introducing externships eventually in their companies,
I see.
right?
Yeah.
That's how we get more companies on board. But then eventually they want to switch careers.
Right.
They'll come back to extern, go through some externships, build that resume back up again,
Hmm.
and explore what they want to do. Because this is the key, right? We're not in a place where you're going to graduate, get into a career path for life. You've got to be nimble
Yeah.
every few years and keep iterating. So from there, you've got this marketplace. Now, this is where recruiting comes back in, because recruiting will at that point need to you'll want to recruit the students
Yeah.
and the career switchers who have proven themselves with certified externships,
Yeah.
verified work experience. Because today, even if I look at a resume, I got to verify that work experience. It's
Right.
through
Yeah.
interviews, through reference checks. But if we can be that trusted platform, I think that's what I'm striving for.
Amazing stuff here. I'm talking to Matt Wilkerson, who's the founder and CEO of Extern. Matt, if there's a website folks want to go to, where should they go?
Yeah, just go to extern.com,
That's
extern.com.
that's easy to remember. And I imagine that's true both for students and folks on the higher ed side, but also if you're looking at getting your internship program up, if you have these business problems and you want to tap into the talent base that Matt's describing, that's also all available through extern.com. Matt, we're wrapping up here. It's been an amazing conversation. I think folks have been brought further in their thinking in terms of the problem space and really your approach. What are some takeaways for folks as they head back to the rest of their lives?
Just that I really think this is one of the major problems for us to still solve. The market for work experience, not the market for people to hire, but the market for work experience is broken. It's really the only market I can think of that no one has spent time actually trying to serve supply for.
Yeah.
And so I think we're at a moment where we can finally do that. And anyone who wants to get involved, of course, students who want to apply to externships, but also companies who want to partner, we're always looking for great industry partners.
Fantastic stuff with Matt Wilkerson. Matt, thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, tell your friends, write us a review, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.